So I think it's industry practice, as well as I think it's in the bylaws of the industry, that we have to have either a Terry Kawaja LumaScape slide or some form of e-marketer graph. So I'm going to spare you guys Terry's slide. I'm sure someone may have already used it earlier today. If not, then you'll get your e-marketer dose. But it's clear that data is driving a lot of the conversation these days. You know, whether that is about how you're going to use your DMP and to what extent and various uses you're going to get more value out of your DMP, could be about what other data you as a marketer or as a publisher need to collect and how you need to use that data to kind of further the ends of your marketing. Either way, it's really about where data is in the conversation and how much it consumes the conversation. To some extent, it's consuming the conversation so much that I think it's become the conversation, and it's put context in a bit of a perception trap. And that perception trap is that even though context, and by context we mean display, let's say, even though context has been growing at a 6 to 12% clip over the last few years, right? It's pretty steady growth. When viewed against audience targeted, whether that be programmatic, straight audience targeting, CRM marketing, it's actually, it looks pretty flat, and in some cases it could even be perceived as down. But that is not true. Against the hockey stick it looks that way, but it's still growing, albeit at a different rate, quite nicely. And so if we remember that data is only part of the mix, the engineering that we have to do to kind of get to the right mix is really kind of it's the recipe. And that recipe has to come from experience. And so when you look at using experience to know that you've got to figure out how to have some form of art and science to make it work, it's really in the mix. So for us, when we look at it, we use ideation to create impact, and we start there. Usually it's rooted in context. We layer some form of audience targeting. Usually it has to be multiple layers of audience targeting. And then where possible, you need to try to find audience within context, because that kind of gives you the most effective layer of messaging. And so as you go up the pyramid, you actually get more success and more engagement from your consumers, but your per unit cost typically also goes up, which puts us in a bit of a bind. So you have to kind of turn the pyramid, which again, industry standard, we have to have a pyramid in the presentation, I've given you two. You have to understand that ROI and attribution are a little bit behind, because even though the most effective piece of your campaign is that audience in sponsorship or in context, in reality, because your run of network and your run of site through context are typically the least expensive per unit, it's still considered the highest ROI. So there's got to be a change in how we measure and how we look at it to put it all together. And part of that comes from the fact that right now the challenge is, how do you buy both impact and reach, or art and science, in the same place? Okay, traditionally, as you guys know, planners have had to go to two separate media houses to do this, to actually get their art and their science. We believe that at Meredith, our Helix approach can actually solve for that. Now, what do I mean by Helix? And what do I mean by our approach? We take our standard assets that everyone has known about us for a long time, whether it be our rich media, social apps for kind of creating dialogue, custom destinations for content distribution, sponsorship, your traditional roadblocks or 100% share of voice, and then ultimately native for in-content engagement. And then you build a suite of data-driven apps. And these data-driven applications or these data-driven assets actually have to come out of a rich interaction between your consumer in your context. So the richer the context, the richer the content, the better and higher value the data is. So we start with first-party data-driven audience targeting. Then we move to engagement solutions or engagement marketing. And by that, I mean your engine to be able to do your pre-campaign insights and understanding intent, your in-campaign ability to measure and then figure out how to optimize based on messaging, and then ultimately your post-campaign measurement against your KPIs. You then use email, and you can use a couple of different forms of email, but we have email that both from a contextually targeted angle as well as from an audience targeted angle. And you can use a combination of newsletters and or custom. And those assets all have to have the same underlying aspect, which is an access to the user and access to the data that drives that user. Shopper marketing, oh, by the way, the email, when you think about it, can help you work the entire part of the entire scale of the funnel. So you use your contextual for your reach, and then you use your custom or your audience targeted to actually help you with mid and lower funnel engagement. And that's how Meredith sees email, basically the entire spectrum. And then we built a shopper marketing platform. And that shopper marketing platform helps not only with mid and lower funnel engagement, but it also helps the beginning process of conversion. And then you actually create programmatic capabilities across all of your different asset classes, whether they be your media channels or whether they be your data-driven assets, so that you can actually programmatically engage to create both reach and efficiency. Most importantly, you then have to actually have faith, and you have to kind of put your money where your mouth is in both your data as well as the recipe that you've created for the client. And so you underpin the entire art-science mix by guaranteeing mutually agreed upon KPIs. And so for us, when you go back to that comment earlier, that creative thrills, but data pays the bills, our view on it is a little bit different. It's people-powered ideas and data-driven performance.